The proceeding will start shortly.
One, order. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, Assistant Chief Constable. Thank you for joining us this morning for this session of our inquiry on cross-border cooperation on policing and security, criminal justice, post-Brexit. You're very welcome and thank you for joining us. I wondered if you might sort of set the scene for us, if you will, by describing what, if any, differences you have noticed since the 1st of January.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. So, by and large, it's a little bit too early to say on a lot of these areas. I'll come first of all to Justice and Home Affairs matters. So, in terms of our legislative vehicles that I know we've discussed previously with this committee, so we maintain the ECRIS system, which translates into UK CRIS now, so that runs as was effectively. In terms of Europol, we still have access to Sienna and to Eurojust, and the UK has embeds in those organisations, and we're still able to access the JITS, the Joint Investigation. Where we see some differences is within the Schengen 2, the SIS2 system, which now translates into Interpol red and amber notices, and some of those will have a power of arrest alerted on the notice. And again, it's a little early to say how that's impacting as yet, but we foresee that will be should work smoothly. One of the things that we've discussed here before was the fact that we are reliant on other countries to double key, to double enter, if you like, their data, wherever it is in their interest to do so. And I suppose the one of probably of most interest is the European arrest warrant and the move to the new agreement. So we do still have I think it's been described here before as a Norway-style extradition agreement. Now that in itself is welcome compared to reverting to the 1957 convention, although it is a little bit too early to tell on that at this stage. I think beyond that then, for us, the other areas of concern were particularly in terms of how organised crime might respond to this. Again, it's a bit early to tell. We are only 3-4 weeks in, so how that might play out. Certainly the lack of tariff differentials was welcome, but it is less obvious perhaps now as to where those opportunities for organised criminality may come. And we're a significant focus around that, as you would expect, and indeed exploitation of the common travel area around movement of people, whether that's illegal immigration, clandestine movement, or indeed human trafficking. And as I say, we have considerable focus on that with partner agencies. And in all these things, we are well linked into the UK-wide mechanisms for dealing with them. Beyond that, one of the things we have discussed previously is the sort of impact on local community and any stresses and strains that may have, particularly in the immediate sort of short term. We were looking to how that might manifest itself with concerns around new arrangements. We're monitoring that closely. I think it's fair to say there is some discontent, maybe to put it that way, and certainly some signals around a feeling on that front. Some of this is, as I expect elsewhere, is being masked a little bit by the ongoing pandemic and response to that. So we're monitoring that. We're working very closely with communities and engaging with community leaders to keep an eye on that and to find ways to support our communities. More medium to long term then, and again, our phase 2 of our Operation Skies, the plan around our response to EU exit. has been focusing on wider community impact, particularly in border areas, and how we support those communities. Again, we have considerable focus in identifying, liaising with communities, engaging with them to understand what that means in terms of any stressors and strains there. Again, it is very early days. We have seen, a number of incidents across Northern Ireland. It's probably difficult to know if they are directly related to EU exit or not, but there are certainly strains within communities. And a further aspect which has not really come to light before in Northern Ireland in the way it has in GB is the issue around minority communities here and the reporting of hate crime. And we haven't seen an increase in Northern Ireland in particularly race-motivated hate crime and that sort of area, which you may have expected to see. We've done a lot of engagement in recent days with those communities, and we do feel there's considerable underreporting. Again, whether that's directly linked or not, it's hard to tell at this point. But all of these things indicate there's some stress and strains within the community.
So you said underreporting. Can you give us an example of things which are not being reported?
So just in engagement with minority communities, they're saying to us that there is, over the last number of months, perhaps year to 2 years, it's hard to put an exact time frame on it, that verbal incidents in the street or lower level incidents of potentially race or faith motivated hate crime, there is underreporting. Now that's not new. It's not new in any part of the United Kingdom that there is underreporting, but it seems to be a significant issue for us here, and we're working very closely with those communities to find ways through that at the moment.
Okay, and is your sort of intelligence gathering, etc., finding the sort of criminal classes, groups, etc., have identified, maybe pro tem, but identified a loophole post the 1st of January, which they're capable of exploiting?
No, at this point, as I said, it's probably too early to see where those loopholes are. We are doing some modelling ourselves and some scanning to try and understand what the opportunity might be. The most obvious part of that at the moment would be the common travel area and the movement of people. As the arrangements bed in and we start to see where those opportunities might be, we'll be able to respond to that and hopefully get ahead of that. As you know, we have the Organised Crime Task Force and the Joint Agency Task Force, which is the North-South bodies, and we have analytical capability within that who are working on these issues, along with the NCA, who lead on a lot of this work.
And tell me, is there anything that you and your colleagues have tried to do or begun to do post the 1st of January, only to think, actually, we can't do that now, or we have to do it a different way, which has made things more cumbersome? Or just from an operational policing point of view, is there no difference between the 30th of December and the 28th or whatever it is of January now? Whatever.
No, by and large, at an operational level, we continue to work very closely with colleagues in Garda Síochána. We have a number of recent operations that we've been running on a cross-border basis. We continue to exchange information. What is interesting actually is the SIS2 system. Actually, Ireland were not a member of that, and I think still aren't until next month. So we had other mechanisms to exchange information, and we still also exchange information at an operational level on a daily basis. We have really good contact and radio communications, north and south. And on the organised crime side of it, as I say, we have those systems in place, and we have joint operations running, and we continue to monitor for any change or any issues, and liaise with our colleagues around that, as well then as linking in with the National Crime Agency. I think it's important to remember, for us in Northern Ireland, this is not simply north-south dynamic, there is the east-west and that route into GB as well.
And just before we turn to Claire Hannah, have you received or are you expecting to receive any refreshed guidance from the prosecution authorities with regards to changes in evidentiary hurdles?
Not at this point. We are well linked into the national groups who are negotiating at a UK level, and that's still the negotiation sit, albeit with the opportunity now for bilateral agreements. We work very closely with colleagues in Public Prosecution Service and Department of Justice, as well as the Home Office. So where there are rewiring, as I've discussed before, in terms of our processes, we have our own standalone capability. We have an international unit here who do that for us. So we haven't had any revised guidance at this point or the need for such. As we see existing European arrest warrants move towards the new system, that's a process matter, and we will work that through.
Yeah. So it sounds from what you've told us, Assistant Chief Constable, that from a policing security cross-border cooperation points of view, it's all working well, and that's to be welcomed and applauded.
I think it's important to distinguish between the various aspects of this. So it is working well in terms of the justice mechanisms that we have. As I mentioned at the outset, it is probably a little bit too early to tell in terms of where there may be some glitches. For example, within the new extradition arrangements, there are still ongoing negotiations at a UK and European member state level. So that remains to be seen. But we're reasonably comfortable with where we are in that at the moment and our relationships with other law enforcement agencies, as you would expect. It is too early to say as well in terms of organised criminality and in terms of community stresses and strains.
It sounds like you've talked yourself into another appearance before us, sort of after Easter or something of that time, to give us an update and a refresh, if you've been amenable to that. I think we'd all find that very helpful. Let's turn now, please, to Claire Hannah. Claire.
Thank you very much, Assistant Chief Constable. And I don't want to draw you down too much, but I just wanted to see if you wanted the opportunity to expand on those stresses and strains that you refer to, just generally in kind of atmosphere, and I suppose what we would call tensions, in the context, obviously, of the fact that this is a cross-border security inquiry. But the context now is the fact that really every county is now a border county in terms of the fact that axis has shifted. You mentioned that the pandemic had probably had an impact in how that was manifesting, but would you be able to expand on that?
So I think we are starting to see, I suppose sentiment would be as strong as I would put it at this point. There's some, obviously we work closely around the intelligence picture to see where we would see sort of community unrest or workings. I wouldn't put it any stronger than sentiment at this point. And I know I've been engaging with community leaders, with local politicians around this. And I think at this point there are just some signal signs of stress that we have seen of late. Some discontent, I suppose I would put it, around being expressed around the new arrangements. That's probably to be expected at some level, and we were prepared for it. What we haven't seen is the disruption to the transport infrastructure or anything of that nature. We have seen some of the issues that partners are working through, and it's their responsibility to lead on around the arrangements at ports. That is then can be conflated with some of the issues that the UK as a whole has experienced in terms of the coronavirus and dealing with the pandemic. So at some levels, it's hard to disentangle that, what is what. But equally, I think it has masked to some degree community concerns, because it is the priority for most people at this point. So as I say, we're seeing within the Protestant Unionist Loyalist community some sentiment around discontent. And more broadly, then we are working slightly more medium to long term, as I say, with particularly border communities to understand the feeling there, and how that relates to other issues such as the pandemic, the potential economic consequences of both the exit and the pandemic, and what does that mean for us in a slightly more medium to long term, particularly bearing in mind there are those other groups who are very willing to push in and try to exploit that feeling of unrest or discontent within communities.
Claire?
Yeah, thank you very much. And as the chair said, we may continue this conversation. I wanted to move on to I suppose to a slightly more tangible issue of goods and contraband. Have you noticed
before we come to that, can I come in, Chairman?
Sorry, yes, Claire, I'm not going to move on to your question just yet. We're still on sort of the opening bit. I did have Mr. Paisley, and then I'll come back. Sorry, I thought you were asking a supplementary to my main question.
Oh, no, I just tried to clarify more.
Ian.
Thank you very much, and thanks, Claire, because I think this sits neatly with your line of questioning. Assistant Chief Constable, you said that there is, quote, some discontent and some strains, and you're talking to community leaders, which is usually code for, you're talking to politicians and to members within the community who have influence across the Protestant Unionist and Loyalist community. I'm just worried that your comments today show a little degree of complacency. Are you picking up any sense of anger and bitterness that all sides of unionism feel about this? They're dealing with a protocol that they see was foisted upon them as a result of people saying there might be violence if we don't get our own way on the Northern Ireland border with the Republic of Ireland. And now they're sitting with this protocol that has diminished their Britishness. I'm just wondering if all you're seeing is some discontent. Is this complacency on your part, or is it spin on your part to try and calm things down? Because I get a sense that there's some sections of the community are starting to sense that they're sitting on a powder keg.
Assistant Chief Constable?
So, Chair, it's an interesting challenge from the member, and given that there were previous remarks about following my last session here that we didn't seem to be overly energised about certain aspects of this, I think it's very important as the police officer leading for PSNI on EU exit matters that I am considered in what I give as evidence to this committee. So I don't want to either downplay or indeed spin anything, or frankly to overplay anything. We are seeing signals, as I said, there are signal incidents that have happened, particularly in recent days, that do. Would you flesh
them out for us, please?
So we're starting to see some incidents of graffiti. We're picking up social media sentiment of a growing discontent, particularly within the Protestant Unionist Loyalist community. That hasn't manifested itself in any outworkings at this point. And I go back to the point around the coronavirus pandemic, probably masking and potentially altering people's behaviour at this point, because people are very focused on that. They're very aware of their obligations around that. So that may moderate people's behaviour in terms of the desire to protest, for example. So I do think that is something that, as I say, it's something we're monitoring very closely. We're working at a local level with communities, but at this point, that's kind of where we are. But it is something that I think, were we not in this current environment around the pandemic, we would probably see a more visible outworking of that on the streets in Northern
Okay, so well, I appreciate that you do have to measure your language very cautiously in these circumstances, as you are on the record, and there are people listening to every word. But we have moved from some discontent in your first opening statement to growing discontent in that answer. And I just wonder if there is any, if you're anticipating any of the things that you've hinted at there in terms of reactions at what's happening at the border posts, or reactions to how people view either the south of Ireland or the rule of law in Northern Ireland, because they're certainly, I'm picking up real strains and real anger and real bitterness from all sections within the unionist community. And I think that it would be foolish not to be alive to that.
Assistant Chief Constable.
So, yes, Chair, of course we are alive to it and have been anticipating. In fact, as I gave evidence here before, the first phase of our Up Skies response to this was based on a planning presumption that we may well see protest, we may well see disruption of courts, and we have planned in terms of responding to that. We have been engaging with communities at all levels to try and monitor that and ensure that we have a proportionate response for whatever we might see. In terms of the members' questions around the rule of law or views towards Ireland, that I couldn't really comment on that. We certainly, I don't have any evidence base to discuss that with the committee. But I'm quite comfortable with saying yes, there is a growing discontent there, based on the fact that we have seen an increasing number of signal incidents such as graffiti and sentiment monitoring that would point to that, and some low-level intelligence, I suppose. But I do think, and this is an important point, I think there are a couple of important dates ahead of us. So there's the end of the transition period, or the grace period, sorry, on the 31st of March. That will focus people's minds, I believe, in terms of how Northern Ireland looks and feels for certain members of our community. And also the concurrency with the coronavirus period. And if we get to the point where we do not have such stringent restrictions, where people aren't as worried about the health crisis, then we may start to see that manifest. If there's no change, we will potentially see that manifest in the likes of protest. And of course, we're prepared for that, talking to people about that and preparing to deal with that in a proportionate manner.
Two quick ones that flow from that. First of all, have you had a readout from the Loyalist Commission meeting that they had with the Northern Ireland office? And has that informed any of your thinking around this? I think that meeting took place in the last sort of 10 days, 2 weeks. And secondly, are you aware of an RTE survey published earlier this week? And this was specifically to do with the response to COVID, but that over 70% in the Republic wanted to see the border with Northern Ireland closed at their side to help them deal with that. Is that informing any of your view at all, or is that too early to say as well?
So in terms of our engagement with the Loyalist community, we have a number of mechanisms whereby we do that. We engage locally with community leaders. I haven't had a readout from the LCC meeting that the member talks about, but we do engage, and we have our intelligence picture as well. And at this point, I suppose it would be fair to say at this moment in time that is not causing significant concern, but it is one that we are closely monitoring. In terms of the survey, I'm not aware of the survey that the member discusses, but we do talk frequently, as I say, with our colleagues in Garda Síochána. We take the sentiment reading from them. At this point again, I mean, it's an interesting statistic. I think again the health crisis is probably focusing minds in Ireland, as much as I'm qualified to speak on it. And the idea of closing the border, as the member puts it. Of course, authorities in Ireland will have to take what steps they feel necessary for their own health crisis, but we haven't had discussions about any such measures of that at all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very helpful.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Claire.
Thank you very much, Assistant Chief Constable. Thanks for those answers, and I and others appreciate that you give rational assessments and take seriously your role to calm rather than inflame, because it is important we don't talk up or talk into trouble at a very tense and difficult time. Just wanted to, as I said, to move on to goods. Have you noticed any increase in the amount of contraband that has been moved in or through Northern Ireland since the transition period ended?
I haven't, at this moment in time, or we haven't, but it's too early to say. And again, it depends on the workings of the arrangements. So as we see various types of goods potentially being subject to although there's no tariff differential, which would have been the obvious, I suppose, indicator. But if we see goods that have effectively become more expensive, prohibitively so, that perhaps the certification process may become incredibly difficult around, those are the sorts of things that we are scanning to see where the opportunities might be, so that we can tailor our operational activity to getting ahead of organised criminality to try to counter that. And again, it is very early stages to discuss, but working with colleagues in the NCA and national structures, as well as with the Joint Agency Task Force and colleagues in the South, we are very alive to the fact that there is the potential to exploit the common travel area for the movement of both goods and particularly people, whether that's around immigration or people trafficking. And not just in the north-south, but the east-west through to GB dimension of that. I think that's an important one for us.
I know colleagues will want to pick up on some of those other issues, but have you detected then with partners, I suppose, other changes in patterns or routes that you think might be used by criminals to enter either particular market?
We have seen some activity around the new transport routes, particularly from Dunkirk to Rosslare. Now that was intercepted by Garda Síochána in terms of people moving from, I believe it was Syria, and also a cash seizure. I can't remember the exact total, but a significant seizure of under criminal assets of cash by Garda Síochána. So we are starting to see organised criminality adapt to the new routes and the new opportunities, as we would expect.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Assistant Chief Constable. Just on the human trafficking, can you assure us that the security forces, police and others, north and south of the border, are alert to the negative impact that human trafficking has on societies on the whole of the island of Ireland? And is there as close a cooperation as you would like to see between the two jurisdictions to combat that? Because it can be in nobody's interest to see a trail of human misery being route marched across the island of Ireland.
Absolutely, Chair. I can give you a complete assurance that we're doing everything we can. We have, under the Organised Crime Task Force, a whole new work strand around skies and the EU exit. This is a key part of that. We're also linked in, as I said before, at every level, with the National Crime Agency, with UK arrangements and North-South arrangements. We are moving the intensity of our Joint Agency Task Force meetings to a more regular rhythm to attend to this. I think we're all acutely aware of the fact that whilst these routes may appear to those who would seek to exploit people as an opportunity. For us, they create even more risk in terms of the time that the poor victims may have to spend in whatever circumstances that they find themselves being trafficked in. And that's of grave concern to us, our colleagues in Garda Síochána and nationally.
Okay, thank you. Scott Benton.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Assistant Chief Constable. You mentioned some of the EU databases which the UK has now lost access to. At this early stage, are you able to comment yet on the impact that the loss of access to these databases has had on policing operations?
So, as I said earlier on, it's probably a little bit too early. We are still waiting to see the complete outworkings of ongoing negotiations on some, such as the extradition elements. Any that we have seen, and we have had some numbers activated in the last 3 weeks, 3 coming, outward movements to Ireland and 2 others to other European states. We have had no issues with those at this point. And we would expect that to go fairly smoothly. The move from eCris to UKCris has been very important for us in terms of accessing records, particularly around vetting and safeguarding, child safeguarding, for example. And those are things that are of real import for us, as they are for the UK as a whole, but particularly in terms of the north-south element, where people in Northern Ireland and Ireland live their lives in a sort of a cohesive manner on both sides of the border, for example. So that has been useful for us, and we haven't experienced any issues with that at this point. As I say, in terms of the second generation Schengen arrangements, we are connected in with the national effort on that, so that hasn't caused us any issues at this point. And with partners in Ireland, which are, I think it's fair to say, our largest partner in that, they didn't actually avail of that previously. So we have arrangements there for us on a north-south basis that are still flowing well, and we're content with.
Scott?
Thank you, Assistant Chief Constable. So from your comments there, I'm assuming, just to be absolutely crystal clear, real-time and live sharing of information, that hasn't been affected. Are you able to categorically state that that's been the case?
It hasn't been affected, but I would add the caveat, as I have previously, that it is quite early. So as with all of these things, there may be unintended or unforeseen consequences in certain aspects of the process that may come to light.
Thank you, Assistant Chief Constable, and I'm finished, Chair. Back to you.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Gregory Campbell.
Thank you, Chair. Assistant Chief Constable, I appreciate the fact it's only 4 weeks since the end of the transition period, and obviously COVID as well, so one would expect criminal activity to take some time to gear up and take advantage of any new arrangements that they might think the new circumstances offer. But in your liaison with our own police service in Northern Ireland and with the Garda in the Republic, is there an understanding in the Republic's police force, to your belief, that it's mutually acceptable to both, to ensure that whatever difficulties might emerge in the next 6 months post the 1st of April, that it's mutually acceptable to both to get a resolution? Because one would presume what happens in Dundalk today could happen in Newry tomorrow.
Yes, Chair. I think, as I've outlined on a number of occasions, I think it is very important to emphasise, we have very good, long-standing working arrangements with colleagues in Garda Síochána. There is of course a recognition in terms of the sort of global nature of organised criminality, and indeed, organised criminality doesn't recognise borders. So in terms of our joint working in this, there's very good cooperation, and as I say, we're intensifying that cooperation and seeking to find ways to further solidify those arrangements, if you like, and to become more effective. So I'm completely confident that there is that, certainly in terms of the understanding, as the member puts it, and the desire. At the end of the day, we're all law enforcement bodies. That is our role, that is our job, that's probably our mission. So I think if we put it like that, there's also, I have seen real concerted effort and understanding between the Department of Justice and the Department of Justice in Ireland to make sure that we have the arrangements that we need to enable that. So I'm perfectly confident in that. As the member rightly points out, it is a little early to see what those opportunities are. However, I would say that organised criminality, and I know Steve Rodhouse is going to be giving evidence later, and he's better equipped to comment on this than I am, but organised criminality can move in a particularly agile way. As I say, we've got new routes into Ireland, and already we're starting to see some adjustment to that. And we need to be as agile and as fleet of foot. So we're talking constantly with colleagues in Ireland. We have been preparing for this. So I'd say in terms of preparing for EU exit, we've been looking at both the potential protest activity and disruption that we've seen in the eastern seaboard of Northern Ireland. We've been looking at how we support communities along border areas. And a large part of our focus has been on organised criminality. And we have operations running from the end of last year right through to this year to tackle that and get ahead of it. And we are doing that constant monitoring, scanning to see what the opportunities are. And so we have a good understanding of where they might go, along with our intelligence capacity and the ability to share information and intelligence with colleagues in the South.
Just further to your comment about the contemplating of potential protests or whatever at the eastern seaboard boundary, has the Garda indicated to you any concern that they might have on the Northern Ireland Irish Republic border in terms of what potentially might or could and hopefully won't happen there?
We've nothing to give. There's no indication of any protest taking place there at this point. As you know, last year on the 31st of January, we did see some protest. It was peaceful. It was to make a point. So from that point of view, there was limited protest along the border area. And at this point, we aren't seeing any signals around that. But as I say, we do have, it's an important part of the medium to longer term strategy in terms of understanding the impact, the sentiment and the feeling for communities in border areas, both coming out of both the health crisis and EU exit and potential economic stresses and strains, along with broader sentiment. That married with potential increase or exploitation by organised criminalities and what that does for communities, and those who would seek to exploit any of those vulnerabilities within communities for violent extremist purposes. We are very alive to all of that, and that in terms of medium to long-term planning is what we are focused on and will continue to focus on.
Sure, thanks.
Thank you. Assistant Chief Constable, before we leave this and we'll turn to Mr. Goodall, could you, I know this probably sounds incredibly trite to ask, but I'm going to ask it nonetheless, which is your message as clear to those who need to hear it, that what the UK Parliament has decided through legislation should happen and seeks to make work, etc. It's your job as the police force to make sure, or police service, forgive me, to make sure that that is upheld. and demonstration, graffiti, violence, etc., cannot undermine and will not undermine and cannot overturn the will expressed by a democratically elected House of Commons.
Of course, our message, and when you say to those who need to hear it, I think our message has been consistent to all sections of society, to government, with partners throughout the planning of this response, and both in listening, hearing our communities and responding to it. We have had an operational plan and a response plan for the contingency of protest manifesting itself, for disruption at the ports, for disruption of the traffic infrastructure, and working very closely with our partners to ensure that their staff feel supported by us as well. So we've been very clear, and we are consistently very clear, that actions such as graffiti will not be tolerated. That's criminal damage, to put it at its most simple level. However, it is important that we are not trite in our treatment of that, that we understand that those actions are a signal of other things going on in that community. And we do engage closely and as best we can to listen to the discontent within that and where that might go. We have consistently said throughout our planning for this and through the pandemic that where people feel moved to protest, they must understand the regulations that apply at the time, particularly pertaining to the health crisis, because that is balancing their right to protest with other people's and the general populace's right to life. And we will deal with those protests in a proportionate manner. And indeed, we have been preparing a number of officers around protest liaison to ensure that we do get that right. We have made those messages clear to anyone who intends to protest that we would discourage it. And that is not to undermine anyone's right to protest or right to freedom of expression, but it is balancing that with the overall right to life, which is a pressing issue for us within the health crisis. As I said earlier, I think when we move beyond the restrictions of the health crisis, we may see elements of this community, depending on where we are at that point around arrangements and how things feel in Northern Ireland. We may see certain sections of the community that would feel moved to protest. And again, we will liaise with them, we will engage with them, and we will facilitate protest where it's lawful, where it's peaceful, as people's right, but we will balance it against the broader rights of the rest of society.
And I presume you'll be future-proofing your strategies rather than sort of proactively, rather than reactively responding to something when COVID-related restrictions either ease or expire.
Well, we have been planning for this eventuality, Chair, for over 2 years now. So we are certainly being proactive in all the scenarios we might face.
Okay, thank you very much. Robert Goodwill.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning, Assistant Chief Constable. You've already given us some welcome reassurances about the effect of losing access to the second generation Schengen information system, SIS2, would have on your operational capabilities. Could I ask two specific questions? The first is that you said that you already had very good operational pre-existing contacts in the Republic of Ireland. And indeed, despite the fact that Ireland joined SIS2 on the 1st of January, nothing seems to have changed. Do you expect that the existing situation to continue indefinitely, or will there be some sort of evolution or transition to the relationship you would have with other countries around the European Union and outside, indeed 31 countries currently in SIS2? And secondly, in terms of countries other than the Republic of Ireland, do you think that the sort of the threshold in terms of maybe the severity of the offence or the level of concern you have about an individual might be lowered, and so you'll be asking fewer questions of the new arrangements than you did under SIS2?
So, if I may, Chair, could I ask the member just to break that down again and to maybe give me the first part of the question?
Right. Well, the first part was you told us that you already have pre-existing arrangements with the Republic of Ireland, which you use on an operational basis using radio communication, etc. Do you expect that to continue as it is, despite the fact that the Republic has recently joined SIS2, or do you think there will be some transition into the type of relationship you'd have, say, with France, which is in SIS2? You know, would Ireland still be treated? I'm hoping you're going to say yes, because obviously you'll have a much better level of cooperation. But obviously, now they're in SIS2, it may be that the model of cooperation that you have with other SIS2 countries might become the norm.
So I think in terms of the broader interactions with other SIS2 countries, that is something, again, we're plugged into the Home Office negotiations and arrangements around any bilateral arrangements that might bring at a UK level. In terms of I will indeed give you assurance and say yes, I do anticipate our close relationship with Ireland to continue. There is a difference here, and the uniqueness of the land border, as we've talked about before, and it's one of the key focuses of our response to this. There are cohesive communities who live their lives, daily lives, on both sides of that border. So there are elements of information sharing which are perhaps more intensified for us here in terms of missing vulnerable persons, and some of the other vetting and safeguarding arrangements that I discussed earlier, albeit we have retained most of those through ECRIS. So that ongoing relationship with Ireland to support those communities and to support the broader communities, because as our member Claire Hannah said earlier, actually the border stretches quite far when you start to look at daily arrangements for people. So absolutely, that's a key part of our ongoing relationship, and we are seeking to build further relationships, both in terms of organised crime and our response to that, and in terms of community policing and how we support those communities. So I do fully anticipate seeing that grow and flourish.
Thank you. That's very reassuring. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Robert Fay-Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Assistant Chief Constable. I just wanted to pick up on ECRIS, which you mentioned there. Obviously, the UK, under the terms of the deal, has lost access to ECRIS. So I wondered if you might expand a little bit more on the impact that is having.
So although ECRIS has changed to UK CRIS, as it's now known, and a negotiated outcome for that means that we do still have access to the information. So I think it's important to differentiate between the titles and the purpose, really. There is a negotiated agreement that we will receive that information within 20 days. Sometimes operationally that can shift. A non-negotiated outcome, we would have anticipated receiving that information something like 65 days. So the negotiated outcome in this is heartening for us. The previous arrangement was that it would be 10 days, but in actual fact, operationally, it didn't necessarily work in that way. As with many of these processes, they're subject to supply and demand, I suppose. But so we don't believe that the shift in that system will be detrimental to us. But we are keeping, as with all of these things, we're keeping it under review with other criminal justice partners, including Public Prosecution Service and the Department of Justice here and then nationally, just to see if there are any of those, as I said, unforeseen things that the processes throw up from time to time.
Okay, and you mentioned once or twice already this morning your good relationships with other forces. Is that helping to exchange data more quickly than the 20-day limit, or have I just understood that actually a 20-day limit is appropriate?
A 20-day limit is appropriate. We'd be very content with that. The relationship with other police services, police forces across the UK always helps, but we're confident and comfortable with the fact that we are linked in with the national structures, the ICCC, the National Police Chiefs Council direction. We work through those systems. We have embeds within ICCC. We've been well consulted along the way in terms of how we interact with the national structures. We retain a standalone capability in Northern Ireland, but we are well plugged into the national structures.
And does that apply to law enforcement agencies in the Republic of Ireland as well? Would you say the same?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's really the point I think that comes out here most importantly. And the fact we have our own standalone capability here allows us to interact with partners in Ireland directly. And that's critically important for us for all the reasons I've mentioned.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Faye. Thank you. Stephanie Peacock now, please. Oh, sorry, Mr. Campbell, forgive me.
Sorry, Chair, just very brief intervention on that point.
Yes, of course.
Assistant Chief Constable, you said the previous arrangement was 10 days, but in practice it didn't always work like that. If I could summarise what you said, if you wanted to sort of put an average on how it did work, was it 12 days or 14 or what in real time, in real life, what was the 10 days actually?
So it would vary. I don't have an average figure for you at this point, Chair, and I wouldn't want to mislead the committee. It would depend on the type of case that we were and the information that we were requesting. I could supply some information on that in writing if that would help.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yes, I think to see that sort of data would be very helpful to us.
Yeah.
That would be good.
Okay.
Right, Gregory, happy? Let's go to Stephanie Peacock then, please. Stephanie.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. What effect, if any, will the loss of the arrest records through the Police National Computer have on public safety in Northern Ireland?
So at this point, Chair, we are liaising and we're part of the overall structure led by Deputy Chief Constable Malik through MPCC at examining exactly what the impact of the loss might be and what is lost or what is recoverable or what that has on Northern Ireland. We do have slightly different arrangements in Northern Ireland, although we are linked into the National Computer. This is being dealt with by the Home Office and the Home Secretary, so I'm not really able to comment on it any further at this point.
Okay.
Stephanie?
No, thank you, Chair. That's fine.
Okay. For those databases, Assistant Chief Constable, that you have under sort of your control and jurisdiction, do you have a backup service?
We have our own standalone capability here, and we do interact slightly differently with PNC than a number of other forces and services. We are a niche organisation. That's the computer system that we use. So we do have different arrangements. However, the full impact of this and the assessment of this is still being worked through, and I'm not really able to comment on it.
No, I understand that that's a Home Office lead. But in those things which are unique and bespoke to PSNI, do you have backup records so that the erroneous flick of a switch on one machine can't delete all the data that you hold? That somewhere is a disk or something.
So, as you would understand, Chair, yes, we do, but in terms of giving an absolute assurance to this committee, these things are complex, they need to be worked through, and I don't want to say something that could be misleading. So we need to work through the ongoing assessment around this issue and see where it takes us.
Perhaps you could give us a note on that. in due course.
Be happy to, Chair.
I mean, I'd work on the presumption, and I hope not fancifully, that there won't be a single police force now in the country that doesn't have, if it does have any bespoke and unique data within its geography, hasn't very hurriedly called in its IT expert to say, if all this is lost, do we have a backup and reserve copy?
Yes, I understand the point, Chair, and I am reasonably confident, but don't want to go any further than that because for fear of misleading the committee.
No, I take that, but given the importance, are you happy to undertake to give us a note on that?
Absolutely, Chair. Yes.
Indeed, Stephen Farry.
Thank you, Chair. I've some very fond memories of ACC McEwan as my local police commander in Bangor many years ago, but I won't go down memory lane.
Could you save your anecdotes for another occasion, Mr. Farry? I'm sure they're fascinating.
Just to ask the ACC then, in relation to data adequacy, first of all, how important is an agreement being reached on data adequacy over the coming months going to be for cooperation between the PSNI and the Garda? And in the event that that doesn't happen, or if it's some wider hitch, is there a fallback plan, a plan B, as to how information can still be shared and in terms of some sort of suboptimal workaround?
Well, I think it's fair to say, Chair, that the data adequacy is the foundation for all our cooperation and collaboration arrangements. We are confident at this point that it is a national UK-wide negotiation. We're working with the national bodies as always to ensure we play our part in this. So we're reasonably confident that we will achieve that. In terms of a fallback to that, at some levels that will have to be worked through on a national basis. Again, I refer to our arrangements with Garda Síochána. We are able to exchange information under the various conventions that allow us to exchange information for between law enforcement agencies. So I think whilst we're confident, we are working with the national structures around national contingencies if that doesn't come to fruition. So yes, there is a plan around that. It's not one that we lead as PSNI, it is one we are tied into the national structures on.
Just to follow through, Chair, I mean, in the event that there was a no outcome, which obviously has to be something on the risk register, is that a showstopper in some respects in terms of some aspects of cooperation?
At this point, I don't think it is a showstopper, but as I say, we are working along with Home Office colleagues. There's a 6-month deadline in this, and so we're doing everything we can, both in terms of achieving data adequacy, but also in the national contingencies that might have to be implemented if that were the case.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assistant Chief, can I just ask, from your assessment and understanding, and again, this might sound an utterly banal question, but sometimes those are the ones that need asking. Are you persuaded that the Home Office is entirely cognizant of the importance when it comes to data adequacy vis-a-vis policing on the island?
Yes, I am, and through partners in Department of Justice here in Northern Ireland and through the national structures, we have emphasised the absolute importance of data sharing capability for us with colleagues in Ireland. That, whilst there is a unique aspect to this for us that I've discussed earlier on, particularly around the sort of lower level quality of life and enabling data sharing around people's lifestyles and dealing with things like missing persons and that lower level end. which are very impactful in the community. It's also important to say that this is critical for all of us in terms of the volume of people that still move through the UK as a whole, including Northern Ireland, around from various parts of Europe. So whilst we focus a lot on our relationship with Ireland, I think it is important not to lose sight of the fact that, as with other services in the UK, the rest of Europe is critically important to us too.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Faye Jones.
Thank you, Chair. A slightly similar question to the one I asked a moment ago, but around Europol and Eurojust. It's my understanding that UK law enforcement agencies can still be involved in the joint investigation teams that are facilitated by Europol and Eurojust, but I just wondered if you could confirm or not whether that's the case.
Yes, we can. We have 3 joint investigation teams running at the moment. We can still be involved in those, and in terms of funding for those, that tends to go through our European partners. For us, that's primarily Ireland, but it also involves other countries. So I think Lithuania and Romania are the other 2 that we are currently involved with. So yes.
Okay. And in terms of instigating those teams, is that something that that you would be able to do, or are you brought into them?
We would have discussions with partners in other countries. So no, we don't instigate them, but we can be a full member of them.
So is that a change from a previous from the way in which it worked in the past? Were we able to instigate them in the past and now we can't?
I understand that's correct.
Okay. Great, thank you, Chair. That was all I wanted to ask.
What's your assessment of that, of the impact of that change, i.e., not being able to initiate?
We haven't experienced that impact. It hasn't had a negative impact at this point, Chair. And it's one that we wouldn't really expect to see. The point about a joint investigation team is that it is in the interests of both parties, or all parties, to carry that out. And a little like some of the questions and the issues we discussed earlier. So if I take Ireland as an example, we would be very surprised to discover that another country wouldn't want our assistance or to work jointly in an investigation that benefits us both.
Sure. It may be if you could just add a line on our growing note, which you very kindly agreed. Could you just give us the figures for maybe the last 2 calendar years of those that you've initiated in terms of a JIT?
I will do, yes.
Okay, that would be helpful. Thank you. Ian Paisley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to turn to the issue of extradition. In November, you'd previously described an extradition agreement based on the Norway-Iceland model as a good alternative, however suboptimal. How do the suspect surrender arrangements in the trade and cooperation agreement compare with those under the European arrest warrant? Or is it too early to say?
In short, Chair, it is too early to say. There are ongoing negotiations at UK government level over the next 2 months in terms of countries that so nationality comes into it and whether or not suspects would be extradited. So we will have to wait and see how that plays out. Even within that, there are probably other fallback arrangements around having individuals prosecuted in their own country as well. But there's a lot of that has to be teased out over the next 2 months.
Have you run a test model or scenario to assess the new arrangements in any way, just in case, to kind of get to grips with how the process would work?
Yes, in terms of the process, we have looked at the process mapping of that for PSNI. We haven't went further than that. Again, this is another one where we're linked into the national effort, if you like. and we do genuinely need to see how some of those negotiations play.
Right, but there's nothing flagging up at this early stage after your mapping or run that would worry you?
No, I suppose it's too early to say.
If we could look briefly then, how will the requirement for dual criminality impact on extradition processes between law enforcement agencies, i.e. the Police Service of Northern Ireland, and the Guards?
It will impact the two countries are very closely aligned, so we don't anticipate for the serious level of criminality that we would be seeking to extradite somebody. We don't anticipate that having an impact in that way. And in terms of nationality, again, it remains to be bottomed out, but actually neither the UK nor Ireland had previously, or at this point as I understand it, put that as a precursor around extradition, so that wouldn't impact on our relationship with Ireland.
I must say, I never cease to be impressed at the good relationships that exist between the Guards and the PSNI, and from my police board days right the way through, that's always been, very, very much front and centre. Are you concerned, or does it pose any dilemma at all to you that the Republic's government doesn't appear to be able to share locator forms for people travelling into the Republic of Ireland with Northern Ireland? And would you be able to give them any pointers as to how to get onto sharing information so easily?
It's in terms of that specific issue, it's not one that I'm across the detail of at this point, Chair. It is something that has come to the fore in recent days, and it's one I know my colleague is looking at in terms of.
Are we adding another paragraph to our note?
Well, we can, yes, Chair.
I assume some of those some of the information on the locator forms, the travel locator forms may have some interest to law enforcement agencies, given some people who may be travelling.
They will do, but I do need to be clear here, Chair, just what falls to direct information sharing between Garda Síochána and PSNI, and what would actually be routed through other processes, and probably need to channel that through Department of Justice here and Department of Justice Ireland, to see what that process would look like.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to hearing you from that. Are you happy, Ian?
Yeah, very much so. And I must say, I didn't really expect that the shared locator forms would give you a lot of intel. I'd say your intel is way ahead of where those forms would be.
Sure. Bob Stewart.
Thank you, Chairman. Very nice to see you, Assistant Chief Constable, again. My question is really about the Joint Agency Task Force. You've already said how well the liaison is going between the police of Northern Ireland and the Guards. And I must say, I've always liked the Guards personally when I've been involved with them, which is infrequently. Sometimes I won't go further.
It's not another Bob Stewart confession, is it? What are we having this morning, Rob?
I don't want any more.
Yes. My part in Hitler's downfall. I don't know, something or another.
Okay, you told me not to say this, Evan. You told me.
I know, and you didn't listen.
No, you just delayed my question. So this Joint Agency Task Force, how do you obviously think it works quite well? Does it work quite well from your point of view?
Yes, it does. Is the short answer. We do a lot together in terms of that strategic level, setting the direction, looking at the information that we share, and understanding what it is that we need to address at the operational level. As I say, we are in discussions about increasing the tempo of the strategic level meetings. We have a subgroup that reports through the Organised Crime Task Force, through the Joint Agency Task Force, if you like, the strategic and operational levels. And there is a specific strand now around the EU exit potential criminality called Operation Fusion. And that is up and running. We've had a number of operations running prior to the transition date. We will, obviously we're in sort of unusual times. So we did have our annual conference was held by webinar in December, but we will continue to build and grow that. I think I mentioned here our ambitions around a crime campus in Northern Ireland as well, and we would expect, we are moving ahead with that, and we have commissioned the terms of reference around that and discussions with the Department for Finance here, and we would see the joint elements of our tackling organised crime being a key part of our future drive on that, and having input at least from Garda Síochána to continue with those both the strategic and operational level.
Thank you, sir. Actually, you've actually merged in my second question, which was about the oversight group and also the coordination group. Fundamentally, you want them to meet more often, but the fact of the matter is, I suspect, having been slightly involved with sort of operations like you've been involved, it's a daily contact if necessary. If there's a problem, you just get on the phone or some classified system to talk to your people on south of the border. So thank you. You've already answered the question. My last question is slightly different. It's 38 Infantry Brigade in Northern Ireland, the Army regular and the Reserve Army component. I'm presumed they're confined to barracks when it comes to security now, but are there instances when you ask for assistance for perhaps patrolling the border, or is that now actually not acceptable anymore?
No, that's not where we're at. That's not something within my remit, but categorically no. The border operations are between ourselves and Garda Síochána.
I thought that would be your question, so forgive me for even asking it, but I just wanted to clarify. Thank you, Chairman. I've finished.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Just before we release you, Assistant Chief, could you just give us a short update, please, on progress to the establishment of the Northern Ireland Centre of Excellence for Crime Cooperation?
Yes, so I touched upon that in my last answer, Chair.
Yes.
So it is something that we are pushing ahead with. I think the Garda model in Scotland is probably the one we would seek to emulate.
Yes.
It is something that we have been talking with Department for Justice here, and as I say, we've commissioned now terms of reference as to how that might look. We have had a number of conversations and discussions with Department of Finance in the executive, and we are looking at engaging partners at this point to see our route to achieving that. These things we are pushing ahead.
What's the status of the talks with the Department of Finance?
They are positive, and as I say, these things aren't quick. They will take a number of years, but I think everyone involved in the discussions understands the need and the benefits that we could get from creating the crime campus. So we are pushing ahead, and at this point, it is a positive outlook.
I still chortle at the phrase of a crime campus. It has this idea of sort of people going off to learn how to be criminals rather than going off to. You say it will take a number of years. Can we or should we wait that long? Should there not be more energy behind this?
So I think there are two separate things here, Chair. There are the arrangements that we've discussed in terms of the Joint Agency Task Force, further building of relationships and exchange of information and joint operations between not just ourselves and Garda Síochána, but ourselves in Police Scotland, ourselves in the Northwest region in England, particularly looking at that common travel area and east-west dimension of EU exit. So they push on regardless. The crime campus, and we will figure out the naming convention before we ever get to dig into the sod. But I think that's about solidifying and just taking best practice from Scotland and seeking to establish that here for ourselves.
And are you involved in the Dyfed Powys police?
Yes, well, we do link directly with any of the services who are touched by this, but our primary focus for us is actually Merseyside and Police Scotland.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. We have no other questions for you, I think, do we not? Is that right? I think that is right. Yes, we've come to the end. Assistant Chief, can I thank you very much for your time, for taking our questions this morning. It's never easy when it's one witness against a whole committee, so we're very grateful to you. And also for the, I think, broadly encouraging picture that you have painted for the committee. You will have had exactly the same concerns that the committee had some weeks ago, and it's a relief that these things are playing out very well. You do look forward to, as time elapses and things have bedded in, to hearing back from you and colleagues of progress. I think it's a watching brief, but thank you very much indeed for joining us. We'll now turn.
Chair, if I may, just
yes.
On one matter, just for absolute clarity, because it is a contentious issue. When we discussed the involvement of military support, I would, of course, remind, I suppose, the committee, or highlight to the committee, that we do, of course, through protocols, utilise the services of the military EOD, and there have been other sorts of military support that have been discussed.
Yes.
But just for absolute accuracy, those are where it sits. Well, thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. We'll now turn to our second session and our second set of witnesses. We're joined now by Steve Rodhouse, Director General of Operations of the NCA, and Paul Morgan, CBE, the Senior Director of Border Force. Gentlemen, you're very welcome, and thank you for finding the time to appear before us this morning. I'm going to leave you to the tender mercies of Claire Hannah, who has our first question for this session.
Thank you very much, witnesses, for joining us. And I'll just get straight in and ask, how has the end of the transition period affected or changed how you're policing ports and airports? And you can decide amongst yourselves there, I suppose, probably Border Force.
We go with Mr. Morgan.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Good morning, Chair. In terms of the situation at the ports, this is something which we've been preparing for, as you'll appreciate, for some time as we move through the transition period. At the moment, goods are flowing effectively between GB and Northern Ireland, about 1,000 trucks a day. And we are not seeing any significant queues or delays or restrictions or delays to critical goods passing across that route.
In terms of managing people, how are you going about ensuring that there isn't racial profiling or perception of racial profiling at ports of entry? Because I'm sure colleagues are aware of reports of people who are resident here or who are entitled to be here but who are non-white, finding that they are stopped every time they're coming into Northern Ireland.
Well, Border Force officers, as other law enforcement agency officers, receive detailed training in terms of profiling and racial awareness, and our officers are specifically trained not to operate in that manner. Our work is based on immigration rules and regulations, and those are applied effectively, and officers, as I said, receive extensive training in those sort of areas that you've said, so that we do not racially profile.
Just then, what way do they address the fact that the common travel area in I suppose EU and other migrants aren't fully accommodated by the common travel area, and statistical evidence will show that there are large numbers and statistically much larger numbers of non-white people being stopped, and of course we know about quite excessive use of Schedule 7 of the Terrorism Act. What tools do you put in place to decide who to stop at ports of entry?
Well, across the common travel area, Border Force do not operate controls because of the nature of the common travel area. That may be more a question for my colleague, Mr. Rodhouse, in terms of police operations, in terms of counter-terrorism, etc.
Anything else? Or Mr. Rodhouse, do you want to come in on that?
Only to clarify that the National Crime Agency doesn't have a responsibility for the work that's been referred to there. So I'm afraid I'm not able to add anything in that respect.
So who does?
That would be policing. With the National Crime Agency doesn't have that responsibility. So that would be counter-terrorism policing.
Okay, thank you. Claire?
Thank you. No, I think the statistical analysis is there, and I just hope that it's something that is borne in mind now and as we work through the new arrangements.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Morgan, can I just ask, in terms of staff resourcing to meet new challenges, etc., are you adequately resourced?
We are adequately resourced. As I said, Chair, we've been preparing for the 1st of January for some time. In fact, for EU exit for over 3.5 years. We have uplifted our overall staffing complement by 1,300 additional Border Force officers across the UK, and we will further increase that number over the next sort of 6 to 9 months. As we
how does that manifest itself vis-a-vis Northern Ireland?
In terms of Northern Ireland, part of that contingent has been deployed to assist in Northern Ireland in terms of the new customs controls which are required under the Northern Ireland Protocol. That's a small contingent because the agreement was that the operations of Border Force in terms of the new requirements under the Northern Ireland Protocol would be conducted in a low-key manner, with those checks sort of conducted, a lot of them electronically in terms of import declarations, safety and security declarations. So we have off to Northern Ireland who will be deployed across all of the Northern Ireland ports from Belfast to Larne and to Warren Point, and that number is shared across those points.
So in terms of numbers, how many of your staff were on the ground across Northern Ireland, I don't know, let's say last June, for example, and how many have you got today?
So in terms of overall numbers, we had approximately 100 staff in Northern Ireland deployed who have been operating, as they always have done, dealing with border security, arrivals from rest of world, etc., and doing anti-smuggling work, and we've uplifted that number by an additional 50 full-time staff to take account of the additional work which we're now conducting under the Northern Ireland Protocol.
So it's 150 staff or a 50% uplift?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So, James.
Thank you. Perhaps this is a question for Mr. Rodhouse in the first instance. I wanted to ask about organised crime and whether there has been any change since the introduction of, well, since the end of the transition period and the introduction of the Northern Ireland Protocol. Have you detected anything different in the activities of organised crime gangs?
Good morning. Thank you. So I think the short answer is no, but there's two reasons for that that I would want to caveat. Firstly, as Mark McEwan said several times, it's too early to say. It's very early to say. And the second is an unusual period of time for obvious reasons in terms of COVID. And of course, the reason I raise that is because a lot of organised crime were...
Sorry, Mr. Rodhouse, could I just interrupt? I'm sorry to do so. Mr. Morgan, I'm not sure if it's coming from your end, but could you mute your microphone?
Certainly.
Mr. Rodhouse was just feeling sounding certainly to me a little distorted. I don't know if it's going to help or not. I'm not enough of an IT person, but let's see if that makes any difference at all. And likewise, Mr. Rodhouse, when Mr. Morgan is answering a question, if you could mute as well, that would be splendid. Thank you, Mr. Rodhouse.
No problem. Hopefully, you can hear me more clearly now.
Yes, that's much better. Yes,
Fantastic.
I've now become an IT consultant. This is very scary.
Congratulations. I could use your services. So I was saying there's two reasons why this is a unusual time. Firstly, of course, it's too early to say. And the second is COVID. And because a lot of organised crime revolves around movements of people. And of course, movements of people have been very different in recent months. So we don't have a comparative period from previous years. So we haven't noticed a significant change around organised crime since the introduction of the TCA. But I need to be realistic here. Organised criminals, we know, are agile and inventive and will find ways to exploit a situation for their benefit. And it would be wrong to ignore that possibility. We have noticed, and Mark talked about this, an increase in traffic direct from the continent into Ireland. So increasing routes, increasing numbers of people. And it would be reasonable to assume that a proportion of those people will be involved in criminality. That would seem to be kind of reasonable hypothesis, but we haven't seen any mitigation, any real implications of that yet. We are very conscious of the role of the Common Travel Area and the possibility of Ireland being used as a backdoor into GB, and along with our colleagues in the multi-agency task force, multi-agency hubs, we're standing up an awful lot of additional work to monitor that, but it is too early to say at the moment, I'm afraid.
Fair.
I just wondered whether perhaps Mr. Morgan wanted to add anything.
Yes.
Well, I think Mr. Rodhouse makes. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, perfectly.
Okay. So I think Mr. Rodhouse makes a very good point in terms of organised crime gangs do react to changes at the border, and I'm sure that organised crime will change their modus operandi in response to the new sort of EU UK operations at the border as a result of the UK leaving the EU. So that's something which Border Force closely monitors. We will be monitoring, for example, and I think Mr. Rodhouse touched on it, ferry routes coming in directly from the continent to Ireland, and then the situation there in terms of onward movement to Northern Ireland across the land border. So that's something which, I mean, we're 3 weeks in, it's too early to say. We've seen no evidence as yet of any increased criminality across those routes, but we will continue to monitor that. We'll work very closely with our NCA colleagues, and we work closely, of course, with PSNI and also with the Garda to monitor the situation over the coming weeks and months.
Great, thank you very much. That's all from me, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. Gregory Campbell, please.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a question to Mr. Morgan, just on following on from his previous answer, the cooperation that he spoke of, the cooperation that you have with the Garda and the other security services in the Republic, just about cross-border activity. How does that manifest itself, and how would it have manifested itself in these strange times of the past 4 weeks?
Well, the relationship between Border Force and other law enforcement agencies such as the Garda is a long-standing one. So we exchange information, and we do joint training courses, for example, and we sort of share and meet in terms of wider criminality and international criminality. So it's along those lines rather than I think you were touching on their joint operations. It's a sort of sharing and training and liaison relationship.
And the Common Travel Area Forum, how has it proved to be of benefit in the context that you're talking about?
In terms of the common travel area, of course, the security of the common travel area is dependent upon the security around the external border. So it's important that those foreign nationals, for example, flying into Ireland, are controlled effectively, and we work with our law enforcement partners to ensure that that is the case.
Well, for example, I mean, you mentioned ferries. Let's take ferries and airlines coming into the Republic, into Dublin or whatever airport. If you have a view or some information that indicates there are one or more people on a ferry or a plane arriving in the Republic who you feel are A, involved in criminal activity, and B, are destined for either Northern Ireland or GB. What's the relationship like in terms of sharing that information? Because obviously if they arrive in the Republic, it's the Republic authorities, it's their duty and obligation to be aware of that and then to notify you if they think that is the case. Well, what's been your experience of that?
My experience has been that is a collaborative and productive and fruitful relationship, and where there is a necessity to share information of that nature, we do so.
So you haven't had any problems with people who you think are coming your way and have arrived in the Republic, and for some reason there's been a hiccup or a problem in getting the information about what flight they're on or what ferry they're on?
I'm not aware of any problems of that nature. The relationship is a collaborative one, and we will share that information. So if we're starting to see abuse of the land border, of people using that route to come into Northern Ireland and across to the wider UK, then that's something that we would analyse and liaise with our Irish law enforcement partners to sort of discuss in terms of the wider security of the common travel area.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Morgan, how would you be made aware?
Well, as I said, we have regular liaison and meetings to discuss trends, what's happening in terms of organised crime, in terms of illegal migration.
And out with that cycle of meetings?
Well, out with that cycle of meetings, there is telephone contact between UK ports and
Sorry, you just froze. We heard telephones. So sorry, you just froze. Could you just repeat that? The tail end.
So we have telephone contact as well in terms of any necessary alerts, but the majority of our work is done on a liaison basis through regular meetings and collaboration.
Okay, thank you very much. So, okay, that's helpful. Mr. Paisley.
Thank you. If I could just pick up on that, it sounds to me, is the Republic's authority sharing the travel locator forms with you? It sounds to me that they maybe are. Is that the case?
I'm not aware of the answer to that question, I'm afraid. I would have to come back to the committee on that one.
See, I have a fear that these hand-filled forms by travellers on aeroplanes are subject to complete and total distortion. That they can be filled in any name. You could write Mickey Mouse on them on any address, or say I'm travelling further north, and they're therefore not looked at, and that the vast majority of them are actually just binned, and that there's actually zero control in the Republic of Ireland of who's entering, or zero knowledge from these locator forms. They seem to be a bit of a gimmick, and I'm just wondering, have you seen or had any access to them whatsoever?
I can comment from. Yes, hello. I can comment from a border force perspective in that passengers arriving in the United Kingdom have their passenger locator forms checked. We check a certain percentage for consistency to make sure those forms have been filled in correctly. And then there is follow-up from other agencies, from the Department of Health, for example, in terms of then contacting people who've come in who are self-isolating at the addresses and at the phone numbers that are given. So there is a structure around that to make sure that the passenger locator forms are being completed. We also work in collaboration with the airlines and the ferry companies, for example, to make sure that passengers who've using those routes are actually checked by the airlines before they board the plane.
Yeah, I've absolutely no difficulty with how this happens in the UK. It is, to my understanding, a much more complex system. And as you said, it's subject to checks and balances, and woe betide someone who tried to get around it in the way that I described. It appears to happen in the Republic of Ireland. They probably wouldn't get into the country, or would certainly face a lot of stiff questioning. So I must commend you for the work which you gentlemen both do at the National Crime Agency and at the Border Force Agency. That's not my question. It's just, is there any sharing of this locator form? It doesn't appear to be, between your agencies and the Republic of Ireland. From what I'm getting, there doesn't appear to be a sharing of the information, and it may actually be duff anyway.
Mr. Morgan?
I'm afraid I'm not aware of the information being shared by the Irish authorities with the UK authorities, and I'm not aware of the answer to that question.
Okay. I won't proceed any longer, but thank you, and thank you actually for the description that you give about how the process works properly in the UK. Could look at
sorry, Ian, sorry, just
yes.
before we leave that, Mr. Morgan, I wonder if you could give us a note on that, please. And you mentioned in answer to Mr. Paisley that a percentage of these are looked at. On average, what is the percentage?
My understanding is that within looking back over the last couple of weeks, and that up to 30% of forms have been checked by Border Force. But as I said before, there is a requirement on airlines to ensure that passengers have completed those forms, and ferry companies before they board. And we are now working to increase that percentage of checking to a higher number, and that's in line with the more stringent.
What is that higher number?
In terms of pre-departure tests, this is the negative COVID tests. We are looking towards moving towards 100%.
Over what time frame?
I'm not aware of what the time frame would be, but we are looking to move rapidly to 100% testing.
Could you define rapidly?
I would say within a matter of weeks rather than months.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Paisley.
And just to be clear, that's for international travellers. That's not for domestic travellers. Am I right?
That's in terms of international travellers, yes.
Yeah, because most of these questions too about locator forms, they would only affect international visitors coming in and out of the Republic of Ireland and in and out of Northern Ireland, of which there's very limited opportunity in Northern Ireland, of which there's quite extensive opportunity in the Republic. It does give rise to my question that I want to go in about tackling human trafficking, which, as you know, is a pernicious evil, which is coordinated on one would say sometimes a worldwide scale by very evil people. And I'm wondering if the crime agencies cooperate, how they cooperate to tackle human trafficking, and what steps can be taken to enhance information recording and data sharing relating to sea travel and, in some instances, air travel when it comes to preventing vulnerable persons being moved against their will for human trafficking purposes.
I'm sure Mr. Rodhouse will want to comment on this, but we work very closely with other law enforcement agencies and with other bilateral partners in terms of human trafficking. Border Force officers are specifically trained in terms of protection of vulnerable persons, and also to be able to identify those who are being trafficked We work very closely to then refer any people who are identified to receive protection, and we look to prosecute those that we identify who are involved in organised crime around human trafficking. And that's something that we're very conscious of in terms of, as we discussed at the beginning of the conversation, in terms of the changes between the UK and the EU. With UK nationals, EU nationals rather, perhaps now requiring work permits in certain cases, a continuing demand for low-skilled workers where those routes are not existing now, and that's something where we may see attempts to sort of circumvent the controls which have now been put in place, and we are alive to that, and we're working very closely with our law enforcement partners, including the National Crime Agency, in terms of what's happening and developing at the border, and we'll be monitoring that going forward.
And how big a problem would you say the human trafficking is in terms of scale in Northern Ireland? Whenever you look at all the other problems and crime issues that you gentlemen have to deal with, where does it actually sit?
I don't think it's right up at the upper end of the scale. That's not to say that we don't see some evidence of that, but I don't think it's a significant problem. But it's something which we are alive to, and we continue to monitor, and will do so under the new arrangements now with the EU and possible other routes opening up.
And have you any fear of people who are trafficked into the Republic of Ireland because of the common travel arrangement that we have on the island of Ireland? Are you worried about any of those people being able to make their way onto UK soil, either into Northern Ireland or into GB?
I think that is something which we will monitor. It is a risk through that route, but you know, we have worked collaboratively over a number of years on the common travel area, and making sure that the common travel area is secure and is not exploited by organised crime. But as I said, and as ACC McEwan said in his evidence, you know, this is a new situation now. It's early days, but we need to monitor how organised crime now reacts to the new routes and the new regulations which are in place. And we will continue to do so, because the protection of vulnerable persons, those being trafficked, is a high priority for Border Force. And we do a lot of work in that area to safeguard and to make sure that those involved in that trade are brought to justice and prosecuted. And we have some considerable success in that area.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Let's turn now to Stephanie Peacock.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning. What mitigations are in place to alert the police and security services in Northern Ireland to people of interest with regard to the loss of access to the SIS2 and to the Interpol information system?
I think that's probably.
I think that might be Mr. Rodhouse's bag. Yes, Mr. Rodhouse.
Very happy if Paul wants to talk about that, but absolutely. So. I've spoken before the committee and I've spoken to a number of committees talking about the importance of data sharing after EU exit, and I've talked positively around the importance of SIS2 as a system, and that's true, because it has been a very integrated Europe-wide system that provides important information right to the front line, and we were clear that we would have preferred SIS2 to have remained a system that we had access to. However, that was not the case. The EU were clear they didn't have a legal basis for allowing us to continue having access to SIS2. And we have always been clear that our mitigation and alternative system is the Interpol I-24/7 notice system. Actually, there is a very similar degree of functionality across a lot of those systems. So the data that the I-24/7 system carries, including alerts for wanted people, is very similar to the data on the Schengen information system. We've worked really hard to make sure that the relevant data from I-24/7 is available to frontline officers and law enforcement across the UK. So that has meant, and when we've looked at the data, we can see there is a significant overlap. So we're confident there is not a data loss in terms of relying on I-24/7 rather than SIS2. The caveat that I've always put on this is that going forward, we are reliant on EU member states making use of the I-24/7 system. And to some extent, that relies on them doing additional work and potentially dual entering. So if they have somebody who they feel is wanted in Europe, they would typically use the Schengen information system to circulate them across Europe. Going forward, we're asking those EU member states to no doubt do that. But if they believe there's a possibility that person might be within the UK, they would need to also take out an Interpol red notice or a diffusion and circulate via the I-24/7 system. Now, we're confident that EU member states understand that, and they've responded positively when we have spoken about the need to do that. But of course, as Mark McEwan said, it's very, very early days. So in terms of the system and the access to the data, there is no reason why it should be suboptimal, but we do need to ensure that the system is well used. In terms of the timeliness of that data, because that's been an issue that's been raised, the reality is that when data from I-24/7 is communicated, so red notices for arrest and things like that, when they come to the UK, they are placed on the Police National Computer within a very short period of time. And once they're on the Police National Computer, they are available to frontline officers. So there isn't a significant delay in accessing that data. So we don't think there is a major loss of functionality here or a major loss of data, but we will remain vigilant to ensure that the system is being used not just in the UK, but also by EU member states so that we have as full access as possible.
Stephanie, anything else?
No, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Goodwill.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Could I ask Mr. Morgan first about passenger name records? Does Border Force use passenger name records database when cooperating with Irish crime agencies to maintain the security of the common travel area and to monitor movement of people who may pose a threat?
Yes, thank you for the question. Yes, of course we do. I mean, passenger name records, which we have retained under arrangements with the EU, are very important in tracking cross-border criminality. We continue to receive that data, which is very useful, as I said, in tracking that criminality. And so that's still a fundamental part of our sort of analysis and our tracking of cross-border criminality going forward. But those records are still retained and received by Border Force.
And further to that, could I ask if the arrangements under the Trade and Cooperation Agreement alter how that cooperation actually functions in practice?
No, those records are still received by Border Force.
Okay. And can you give any assurances in terms of the way that these records taken by Border Force are kept in line with data protection standards?
We have the highest data protection standards for law enforcement data, which is retained by the UK authorities, so I can give you that assurance.
Yeah. Could I just ask a question about exit checks? Because I know when I was Immigration Minister, one of the frustrations was that if an American tourist arrived at Heathrow but left from Shannon, we didn't pick them up leaving the United Kingdom. Therefore, it was a frustration that we perfectly law-abiding people, but we didn't know they'd left. Has any progress been made in the time since I was at the Home Office to actually work with the Irish Republic to ensure that we do pick up people leaving so we can better identify immigration overstayers or other criminals?
I don't think that data is shared as a matter of course.
Okay, thanks very much. So no change since I was there, really. I think I was going to ask Mr. Rodhouse about the SIS2 system and the I-24/7 and Interpol red notices, but I think he's actually answered all the points I was going to ask in reply to Stephanie's question. So I think I'll probably hand straight back, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwill. Thank you very much indeed. Not only proves that you know the questions, but also listening to the answers as well. So that's right. I think that has been covered off. Let's turn now to Mr. Farry, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to our witnesses. I want to turn to the issue of data adequacy and just ask a couple of interrelated questions in that respect. I mean, first of all, what do you think still needs to be done to ensure that the UK does receive that data adequacy recognition within the next number of months? And secondly, in the event that doesn't happen, in effect, what are the consequences going to be? Is this a showstopper to some extent, or do you have a plan B, which would be obviously suboptimal, but would still allow for some degree of data to be shared?
So I'm happy to speak to that, if I may. So clearly data adequacy is important, but the negotiations around data adequacy are separate from the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, and they're ongoing at the moment, so I certainly wouldn't want to prejudice those. As you may know, we are currently able to exchange data under some bridging mechanisms that will persist for the next 6 months. In the event that there isn't a data adequacy agreement, and I'm really not the right person to speak about what needs to be done to secure that, to be honest, then we would be reliant on the EU member states accepting our data adequacy assurances now and the appropriate safeguards that we have in place. And we've continually worked with law enforcement in EU member states to demonstrate the manner in which we secure their data and treat it. I am told, and this is a technical issue, but I am told actually that the Trade and Cooperation Agreement is in fact separated from the Data Adequacy Agreement. So actually on a technical basis, I understand that a failure to or no Data Adequacy Agreement would not technically affect the status of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement and the tools that are contained within. But I think it would be reasonable to say that in the event of no Data Adequacy Agreement, ourselves, from a UK perspective, and EU member states would be round the table again, working through the next steps. But in the meantime, it would be for EU member states to accept those data assurances that we've been speaking about, because of course we've been swapping data for some time. So it's an important issue, but I wouldn't want to prejudice the ongoing and slightly separate negotiations around the full data adequacy agreement.
Chair, if maybe you're slightly reframe that, and I'll certainly take the points that are being made in that respect. But surely the UK demonstrating to the EU how we handle their data is the very crux of the process of achieving data adequacy recognition. So in the event that the UK isn't seen to be handling data properly to the European Union's satisfaction, whether we feel that's reasonable or not, does that in effect bring some degree of that cooperation to an end?
So I'm told technically not, but I imagine there will be an awful lot of work by people more informed than I on that. But I'm told that they are separate technical and legal issues. And at the moment, of course, we have those bridging arrangements. So I don't think it's a case that it's a showstopper, to use your language. But clearly, there would be efforts made on behalf of the UK to understand what the barriers are and to resolve them, I would assume. But I'm speaking slightly outside my area of technical knowledge.
Sure, absolutely. I appreciate that. And it's also, I think, just worth reflecting for the record that the data adequacy issue is much broader than simply policing and security cooperation. There are issues around business as well. So it's a multifaceted issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barry. I mean, Mr. Rodhouse, given that Mr. Morgan has, and I think perfectly correctly, said that we have incredibly high data protection standards and the like, on the premise that where there's a will, there's a way, would you expect, from a professional perspective, would you expect there to be any actual concerns with regards to how the UK handles, holds, collects data that would preclude?
I mean, this is a sort of a personal observation from my professional life that
feel free to make one.
Absolutely. When policing and law enforcement relies on accessing and using data to good effect, and I'm just mindful of the amount of time and effort and resource that we in the UK allocate to making sure that we do that in a responsible fashion and we safeguard the interests of the individuals concerned. So I would very much hope that the EU would see that and see that it's reflected in our practices. So I know I would very much hope that there would not be a difficulty. The other point to stress.
Okay, could we just pause there for a moment? When we were all working under the same data rules and regulations, if you look across the different member countries of the EU, how often was the UK found to be in breach of the regulations which it was obliged to follow in comparison with France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Belgium, Holland, for example?
I'm afraid I don't have that information. That's well outside my sphere of knowledge, I'm afraid.
Okay, is that information accessible that you could provide a note to us on? Because I think it would be very helpful if we were able to say when we had no breaches, or we were the lowest in the league table of data breaches, etc., as a way of making the case that the UK can be trusted with regards to data management, holding and collection.
So, Chair, I really don't wish to be unhelpful, but that's a very technical question that's well outside of the National Crime Agency's sphere of knowledge. So I think it would probably be better directed to potentially the Home Office, although colleagues there might say it's not them. But I would be relaying information from a uninformed viewpoint, from the point of view of one agency that would only be partly involved. So I'm sorry, I don't think that I can really help you.
No. That's a perfectly understandable answer. Hopefully, it's an understandable question, and we will have to find another avenue to try and alight upon the answer. I had rather hoped that you were going to say, of course, the NCA's tentacles, experience, and knowledge is so vast as to be a sort of, a nexus of excellence, but there we are. Right, let's just, Stephen, had you finished? Thank you. Let's turn to Faye Jones, please. Faye?
Thank you, Chairman. I wanted to ask a question, which I'm sorry if I don't put quite correctly, but I wasn't a member of the committee at the time. But I understand that you've previously told the committee that continuing our involvement in Europol was extremely important to sharing of intelligence. Obviously, now that we are not part of, or we don't have access to the Europol information system, how can that loss be mitigated so as to make sure that as comprehensive an intelligence picture is available?
Sure. No, that's absolutely right. So I have spoken before about the importance of Europol, and I will continue to do so. It's a very important partner for us. When I look at the organised crime is in essence a transnational threat. When I look at the threats that face the UK, almost all of them at some point transit through Europe. So it's very, very important that we can work multilaterally across Europe, and Europol allows us to do so. In reality, the deal that has been struck, EU exit, tactically changes very little in terms of our relationship with Europol. We will remain having the UK Liaison Bureau in The Hague. We will continue to have staff there. We will have access to a lot of the messaging systems, and we will be able to continue to share intelligence and work collaboratively with colleagues. So that's great. The areas where we will not have the same relationship is that we won't have any leadership or management responsibilities, which is where we did before. We sat on Europol Management Board, and we won't be doing that in the future. So we will have to work hard, but I'm confident in our ability to do so, to ensure that we have the same influence to ensure that Europol places its attentions on the crime threats that matter to the UK. You talked about the Europol information system. That is a system that we will not have direct access to. In reality, that is a minimal impact to us. for two reasons. Firstly, the system effectively signposts where other intelligence is held, and we will be able to have inquiries done on our behalf and then follow up on them. So we're confident that we will not be losing access to effectively signposts where data and intelligence is held. So we're really positive around the future with Europol. I'm very grateful that we've got the sort of third country arrangement that we have.
Thank you. That's very, very helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, mate. Scott Benton.
Thank you, Chair. I understand that UK law enforcement agencies will now be unable to initiate the establishment of joint investigation teams. How important is it to be in a position to be able to initiate those investigations rather than merely participate within them? And what are the likely implications of this going forward? And that question's to Mr. Rodhouse, please.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. So in reality, we have been operating in joint investigation teams outside of EU measures for some time. And so we have been operating on Council of Europe measures, which do actually permit us to initiate joint investigation teams. So actually, we will be continuing as we have. The NCA has, or the UK has, we're involved in 40 joint investigation teams at the moment, and we will continue to work within those. The only issue really that differs is that we will not be able to initiate requests for funding of joint investigation teams, but we will still be able to initiate JITs when there is a lawful and valid reason to do so. So we're confident there's no loss of capability there.
Scott?
Thank you, Chair. No, that's a very reassuring answer, so nothing further to add.
I was going to echo that. That's really encouraging to hear. Thank you. Let's turn to Ian Paisley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I really want to turn to the issue of extradition. And I wonder, would it be possible if you could give us a brief outline of any operational part that your agencies play in the extradition arrangements?
So I can pick up from a National Crime Agency perspective. So we operate the UK's International Criminality Bureau, that when a Interpol red notice is received into the UK, it is our people that use themselves and technology to validate that and to place it onto the Police National Computer so that it's accessible and visible to law enforcement. And in doing so, they look at the terms of that red notice and ensure that it meets the criteria that the UK has chosen. That's probably our key.
And from an operational perspective, are you satisfied that the new arrangements on suspects surrender agreed between the UK and the EU compare well with the European arrest warrant?
So we do. You know, there's a couple of factors around the European arrest warrant that were really important to replicate, and we have been able to do so through the deal. And so, first and foremost, there is a power. We are able to arrest on an Interpol red notice, which is an important thing because, of course, if you see somebody on the street, you establish their status as someone who's wanted. You want to be able to arrest them. And of course, there are also timescales for the surrender of subjects as well. So actually, the mechanics look positive. The issue, and you know, I would want to be sort of proportionate about this, is it's a new process. It's not well practiced. It's early days, and we need to see how it operates. But in essence, there's no reason why we can't continue to have the same flexible and responsive system that the European arrest warrants gave us.
You're giving it a fair win there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anything? Thank you, Mr. Paisley. Gentlemen, it sounds as if it may be helpful to have you back before us after an shorter lapse of time for a sort of temperature check, if you will. But I wonder, I'm going to ask you the last question, which may be a bit sort of Columbo-ish. And I'm hoping that you'll say that you both sleep like babies. But in the event that you don't, and I hasten to add the caveat that within the confines of your professional life, as far as our questions are concerned, what, if anything, is keeping you awake at night? Should we go to Mr. Morgan first?
Well, to confirm, Chair, I sleep very well, thank you. That doesn't mean we're complacent. We're always alive to new risks and threats. We'll continue to monitor those as the new relationship with the EU develops. But at the moment, there is nothing keeping me awake at night.
That's very good news. Mr. Rodhouse, you say the same thing? You all look very rested, I have to say. So,
I too sleep well. If there was anything about my professional life that kept me awake, it's just that recognition. I alluded to it earlier, actually. Organised criminals are creative, agile, responsive, and are always looking to exploit some part of our system for their gain and for others' misery. And I'm very confident in the ability of the National Crime Agency and other law enforcement partners to keep pace with that and to get ahead of it. But it keeps people up 24 hours a day doing that work, and we need to continue to do so.
well, it is head of the Hydra, isn't it, really? It's no more than that. Gentlemen, on behalf of the committee, can I thank you again for appearing before us? Can I thank you for answering our questions? I think there's one or two commitments for written note, which we will accept and look forward to that. And thank you both, through you, to your organisations for all that you and your colleagues are doing in support of and protection of those who live and work within Northern Ireland. Thank you very much indeed. Order, order.
The proceeding has ended.